Hello, everyone, and welcome. Please find your seats. I want to thank you all for being here today, both online and in person. I know it has been a busy, exciting, and hopefully inspiring CSW, and grateful to all of you for joining us in the middle of all of the other things going on. I am Neeraja Penamecha, Associate Director at Data2X, and we are honored to co-host today's event with the Office of the Women's Rights Advisor to the President of Kenya. For those of you who may not know, Data2X is a civil society organization hosted at the United Nations Foundation. For over a decade, we've advocated for the production and use of gender data that fully captures women's desires, women's needs, and women's experiences. Because we believe that when policymakers and advocates have quality gender data, they can make real progress toward gender equality. But what does it take to arm them with that data? And that's really the core of today's session. How do we build the political will necessary to collect and leverage gender data to advance gender equality? So today we'll hear from policy advocates and champions who are working to scope, incentivize, and drive political prioritization and action for gender data. We'll launch a new report from Data2X and our partners, FemDev and Local Development Research Institute, that surfaces key insights from conversations with governments across the globe. And we'll be speaking with Honorable Harriette Chiggai, Women's Rights Advisor to the President of Kenya, and Data2X Gender Data Champion. So I'd like to begin by turning over to our first speaker, Michelle Milford-Morse. Michelle is the UN Foundation's Vice President for Girls and Women's Strategy. She leads the Foundation's efforts to promote gender equality and the rights and agency of girls and women in collaboration with the United Nations and its partners. And she's been a steadfast supporter of Data2X and our mission from day one. Michelle?
Thank you so much, Neeraja, for that lovely introduction. Let me say Ramadan Mubarak for those who are observing, and allow me to start by saying that the UN Foundation lost a beloved and dear colleague, surprisingly, yesterday, and after a long battle with some health challenges. So to my friends at the Data2X team, I know you're coming here today with a heavier heart and have brought your heartbreak with you. And I just want to say, I was thinking about it this morning, Leslie would have loved this conversation. She would have really applauded your efforts to recognize what's political and what deserves our attention and our investment. So I brought Leslie here with me this morning. On behalf of the UN Foundation, I'd also like to convey our deep, deep gratitude to the Office of Women's Rights, the Office of the Women's Rights Advisor to the President of Kenya for co-hosting this conversation with us. And I'd like to recognize our special guest, who I just had the deep pleasure of meeting, Honorable Harriette Chiggai, for her championship of gender data at the highest levels of the Kenyan government. Thank you for doing that. The fireside chat later today that was referenced will feature a conversation with her about building political will at the national level. And hopefully we can get other governments to emulate that. I know we're all very eager to learn from you. We're here today because gender data is a powerful lever of global progress. And when it is used to craft and monitor evidence-based policies and programs, and also to fuel feminist advocacy, to give us a tool to argue for what should be, it can advance sustainable development, and it can also accelerate progress towards gender equality. And given how slow and uneven and fragile that progress has been, I think we all are looking for new tools and opportunities to push our agenda to where it needs to be. And that means if you care about gender equality, but you're not paying attention to gender data, you're not paying attention. And I want to give credit to that line to Natalie Cleveland, who clearly knows how to use words to make a really compelling argument. Natalie, I want that on a button. In some very meaningful ways, gender data still isn't given the prioritization that it deserves. And I was reading the report that you can access through this QR code. I was reading it this week, and we have so many data points that I think stop us in our tracks that when I came across this one, I thought, oh, goodness. In 2020, donor investment in gender statistics decreased by 55% worldwide. So investment in all data decreased worldwide. but the decrease in investment in gender data was 3 times the decrease in other types of data. And so, you got to imagine at the beginning of the pandemic, this is a great example, in this moment where we really needed to understand the difference in health outcomes between men and women, funding for gender data was cut. It was one of the very first things that's cut, which really undermines our understanding and our ability to make decisions and act. Everyone knows the Sustainable Development Goals and how much we need to get those on track, and how we need to use data as a tool to make sure we're making the right moves and making the right decisions. But fewer than 2/3 of Sustainable Development Goal indicators that require sex disaggregation have up-to-date data in most countries. So while global policymakers seem to deeply agree, they definitely agree that policymaking is more effective. They say this all the time, when we can ground our decisions in evidence, we still aren't adequately funding, collecting, or using data about their unique experiences. I suspect many of you, like me, think that this is on purpose. And today we're going to talk about why. Gender data is not just a technical issue. Gender data, the collection and use of gender data, is a political issue. And I know the team wants you to leave today understanding that. Without political will to fund gender data in national budgets and strong commitment about its collective use across governments, gender data will remain chronically underfunded and inconsistently collected. And that's just not an outcome that we can tolerate for the world's girls and women. Just last year, Data2X, in partnership with FemDev Consulting and Local Development Research Institute, set out to better understand the contours of the global political environment for gender data. Today, they're proud to launch a new report, Building Political Will for Gender Data, Findings from 30 Countries. That's the report I was reading this week, and I really want to encourage you all to read it as well. You can scan the QR code, as I said, and take a look. I think it will give you lots of insights for the work that you're doing. Because in today's conversation, we're going to dive into the political environment for gender data and what it takes to incentivize political prioritization, to mobilize championship, and to boost resourcing and accountability for gender data. And our experts are going to make this argument much better than I am. But I suspect you all know what they're going to say, which is that we need lots of solidarity across all sectors. We need philanthropy, media, civil society, and governments to stand shoulder to shoulder and say that this is important, that we need your political will on this. And it's overdue to have that type of advocacy for this issue. So let's do that today. Let's talk about how to get more money, more prioritization, better policies that better reflect the lived realities of women and girls and gender diverse people all over the world. That's the world I want to live in, and I know it's the one you want to live in too. So let's talk about how we can create it by demanding the data that we need to build it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle, for starting us off on that thoughtful note and reminding us that we all have a part to play. I'd now like to welcome to the stage Muchiri Nyaga. Muchiri is the co-founder and executive director of LDRI. He has over 20 years of experience working in data and technology and governance, with a particular focus on mission-driven governance, data for decision-making, and open government in Africa. LDRI is an action-oriented think tank supporting African countries to take practical, evidence-informed action to end extreme poverty and hunger and reduce inequalities. So Muchiri and the team at LDRI examined the political environment for gender data in 20 sub-Saharan African countries. And Muchiri is joining us today to share insights from that work. Muchiri?
Thank you, Niraja. Thank you, Data2X. And delighted to be here on the sidelines of CSW. A lot of familiar faces, friends, and timers that I have to start because I have a reputation. I say I'm going to be brief and people burst into laughter, and it's one of those things. So thanks so much. It was really an amazing experience conducting this study. My colleague Amina Nzinga, who couldn't be here, was really at the forefront of working with country researchers to really understand the issue of political will for gender data in Africa. And some of the things that we looked at, I'll be unpacking them very briefly for you. The report that's been published does a whole lot more justice than I'll be able to do in 8 minutes. So this is a qualitative study, and as you've heard, we looked at the political will for gender data in 20 African countries. They were Anglophone, they were Francophone. We kind of tried also to get a sense of what that looks like, even in countries that, and none of those, they're Lusophone countries. I think we even tried to get Angola, we managed Mozambique, and I think that was for us a very interesting experience, just trying to understand what those politics look like in countries that we don't normally engage with because of language. We looked at 3 broad areas. We asked questions around resource mobilization. How is data financed? How is gender data financed? Particularly focused on domestic resource mobilization. We looked at technical capacity. Do these countries have the infrastructure? Do they have the technologies that they feel they need? The technical experts. But then we also looked at the use of that data. There are instances where the data is there, so is it usable? Do people get the job done using this particular data? And I think what we found varies. It's an interesting landscape, but there are commonalities across almost all 20 countries. We've found across these five broad areas that there's still a lot of work to be done, and in some places a lot of progress has already been done. So what do we mean when we say gender data? That seemed to be one of the questions that we had to focus on, and one which we realized we had taken certain assumptions around the question of what is gender data. Do people broadly understand it? What are the governing frameworks that are in place? What's the financing situation? Of course, we looked at that with a particular focus on domestic resource mobilization, but also development partner support, how that data is being used, and of course the stakeholder coordination issues at the national level. So the definitions. This was important for getting everyone on the same page. What do we mean when we talk about gender data? I think we found that the vast majority had an incomplete understanding of what gender data is. So for the majority, the conversation stops at sex disaggregated data. Doesn't go beyond that to look at data that specifically addresses issues facing women and girls, data that attempts to at least give a more nuanced view of how these differences affect the various genders. So that interchangeableness, that one, does pose a bit of a challenge, because then the conversations that you do end up having around investments, around frameworks, policies, etc., may not go far enough, and might not even go in the right direction if we're not on the same page. So there's a bit of work there that still remains to be done on advocacy. This is especially beyond the National Statistics Office. Among the statistics, the statisticians, this is not an issue. Many of these countries are members of the Gender Data Network, so the focal points are really key to this conversation. So the definitional issue wasn't as big with them, but the moment you step out of the National Statistics Office and outside of the Gender Ministry, then you begin to see these challenges showing up. At the governing frameworks level, many countries have gender equality legislation, their policies, they made a lot of progress in this area. Across Africa, the work that has been done over the years, especially around domestication, implementation of the protocol on the rights of women, the Maputo Protocol, has really helped countries move forward in a more comprehensive way. The statistics offices tend to have gender statistics departments. There are gender focal points. So a lot of that is in place, but there are no explicit frameworks governing gender data, right? So that also remains an area that requires a little bit more work. But the institutional arrangements and all of that have been there because of the National Statistics Office have been very key to at least getting us to where we are now. So the leap forward from here is not as massive as it would have been if none of this existed previously. Financing was a big question. Where's the money? Who's funding? What does it look like? In many instances, gender data is tucked within programming, within existing projects. So you really can't isolate the amount of money spent. But there was general understanding, general agreement that there is limited funding. The majority of the money is still development partner support. So domestic resources don't really show up as a big source of money when it comes to issues of gender data. And coincidentally, we found that this was also true for data for development more broadly. A lot of it is development partner support. So the moment a donor program ends, that data pipeline cuts off as well. So there is a need to tug on this lever a little bit more, especially taking advantage of those places where we have high-level political champions working on improving gender data. Is it being used? Is it being used? So we have those who are working on the gender issues who are always demanding data and demanding a certain quality of that data. They see the data when in instances when they see the data, they find it sometimes it's usable, sometimes it's not. And this was one of the places where we had certain variability. The quality, the capacity, all this would be different from country to country, and in some instances also from department to department. If you are looking at places where there's a big donor program, chances are there will be money to address some of these issues. If it's not there, then you have these kind of problems. The formats, can you digest this data? Can you take it, ingest it? Can you copy and paste it? Just basic stuff like that. Many times you'd find scans of documents. They say they cannot use this. They have to transcribe. The data that is specific to gender, such as GBV, time use, informal employment, care work, those are data sets that are extremely important, but extremely limited to find. And of course, the issue of granularity. Even within our countries, there's a variation in terms of what a situation looks like on the ground between one place and another. We don't usually have good data to establish the extent to which these differences are occurring at a geographical level within a country. So the granularity problem is really big. In a related piece of work we did with Data to X support, thank you so much, we found that the infrastructure problem continues to be one that holds us back. So when we asked counties, subnational governments, how they manage their data, where do they keep their data, how do they store it, how do they finance it, you find that we have an even more existential issue that affects gender data. Where is this data? It's on flash disks, it's on attachments, on emails, it's in Google Drive. So discoverability for a lot of this data is extremely poor. And this will continue to cause problems for us, even when we have high-level champions pushing for the availability of that data. If it is hidden away in email addresses and in Google Drive, personal Google Drive accounts, that's going to be an issue. So there's an issue there around policy and enabling environment for data to be more available. Stakeholder coordination is one of the places where the sector has done really well. And that's mostly because of the work that's been done around the protocol, around SDG 5, around CSW, around all these other spaces. So you will find a great deal of coordination existing at the national level, but there isn't enough of that happening around gender data itself. But we've come a long way when it comes to stakeholder coordination. It makes it easier now to have a conversation around gender data at a national level because the stakeholders are already collaborating, they're already working together on something, and the issue of the indicators is one that's already clearly in their line of sight. So these are the levers that we think political champions could tag on, addressing the issues of data governance, addressing the issues of infrastructure, the financing, particularly domestic resources to ensure that that is a bit more stable, and of course, the human resource development issue, so that we have technical experts who can manage data, use it, share it, disseminate it, make it more usable for those who want to get their job done. I'm pretty sure my timer wasn't working. Oh, what you know, it was. You can clap for me now. Thank you very much.
A hard act to follow, but our next speaker is up for it. Thank you, Mashiri. That was such a rich presentation, such an important reminder that we need to look at the whole system and think about it from a holistic perspective when we're making decisions and when we're making investments. And that takes us right into our next presentation from Dr. Kate Grantham. Kate is the founder and executive director of FemDev Consulting. She is a prolific researcher, and she brings a feminist approach to her work. And that work is on gender equality and women's empowerment, and it has been used to inform policy and programming from multilateral agencies, bilateral agencies, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Kate co-authored the report that's launching today, which built on LDRI's work and bringing in additional perspectives to assess the international landscape for political will for gender data. So Kate, over to you.
Thanks so much, Neerja, for that warm introduction. Prolific researcher is so generous. I think I want to make that my new LinkedIn title. That's so kind. Thank you. And thank you to Neerja and to Natalie at Data2X for organizing this fantastic event. Like, what a beautiful space. What an important topic. Thank you. I know many of us know how much work goes into event organizing, so thank you so much for that. It really is an honor to be here today to officially launch Data2X's new report, the Global Synthesis on Building Political Will for Gender Data, and to share some of the key insights that emerged from our cross-regional analysis. So this research was conducted by Data2X in partnership with LDRI and my organization, FemDev, and it aimed to improve knowledge on the political environment for gender data. As Michelle said early on in the day, gender data is political. It's not just a technical issue, and this was largely the premise, the motivation for our research. In fact, the lack of political will and demand for gender data is often invoked as a reason for its scarcity and as a major obstacle to financing. Yet the political environment surrounding gender data has actually received relatively little examination and still remains poorly defined and understood. So we set out to map the contours of this political environment for gender data, including key dimensions, key barriers, and key enablers for political will where advocacy efforts can be targeted. The global findings synthesize interview data from 30 countries, including the LDI research that Muchiri just presented from Sub-Saharan Africa. And across these 30 countries, we spoke with government stakeholders from women's and gender ministries, from development agencies, and from national statistical offices. These are folks that I would consider to be gender data champions. Gender data champions within their respective institutions, within their governments, just like many of you here today and online. So hopefully their perspectives should resonate with you. So while each country context is different, our research identified 5 common dimensions that constitute the political environment for gender data at the national level. This includes political support and prioritization of gender data by those in leadership positions within government, national policies and frameworks that provide a foundation to support and sustain gender data efforts, coordination among government departments and agencies that are responsible for data collection and use, domestic financing and external support provided by donors and partners, and engagement with non-state actors to advocate for and use gender data. And as I mentioned, for each of these 5 dimensions, we identified barriers and enablers for political will. And today I'm going to focus just on the enablers that we identified. And more specifically, I want to share with you 5 strategies that emerged from our interviews for building political will for gender data at the national level. This includes strategies that the stakeholders we spoke with were either considering, testing, or already implementing as part of their own efforts to build or sustain political will for gender data within their national contexts. So here we have it, 5 strategies to build political will for gender data. First is to anchor gender data mandates and commitments within broader national policies. One of the things that we heard repeatedly during interviews was the benefit and importance of having in place some kind of national policy or framework that guides the collection, analysis, and use of gender data. Now, in an ideal world, this would include a standalone gender data policy within a country. Unfortunately, that is rarely, if ever, the case. More often, what we're seeing is the integration of gender data mandates and commitments within broader national policies, such as national gender equality strategies, national development plans, or national statistical plans. These kinds of documents can outline clear definitions, indicators, guidance, and budgets to enhance the quality and availability of gender data. Importantly, though, and we heard this a lot, they also provide a strategic policy anchor for gender data advocacy and initiatives to help ensure the sustainability and continuity of gender data collection across political transitions, when we know so often our efforts at gender equality get stifled when new governments come into place, things lose momentum, et cetera. Having an existing policy or framework allows for more continuity and sustainability in efforts. And for countries without a policy or framework like this in place, this is a really key and strategic area to focus efforts on. Second, organize awareness raising and capacity building initiatives. Limited knowledge about the importance of gender data for evidence-based programming and policymaking is unfortunately widespread in many national contexts, and it can really undermine political support and funding for gender data. Now, fortunately, even small-scale initiatives to raise awareness and build capacity for gender data within a government can go a long way to catalyze new momentum and support for gender data. Initiatives can target stakeholders across institutions, across levels of government, even across different political parties for broad impact, or they can target a specific government or agency for deeper impact. And a really cool example of this that was highlighted in the research is the Data Feminism series, which was co-organized by the GIZ Data Lab and Data Pop Alliance. And this series aimed to increase knowledge within the government of Germany, and in GIZ specifically, about the importance of a feminist approach for gender data and the role of gender data in successful feminist development cooperation. It was a series of 4 events. It covered different aspects of gender data, included different speakers on different topics. The final event was actually this very cool working session where GIZ colleagues came together, applied what they'd learned, developed concrete recommendations for their work. More than 150 stakeholders participated. And what we heard from speaking with folks at the Data Lab is that this really helped to foster a shared cause, improved ways of working, and new momentum for gender data within GIZ. It's a very cool initiative. If you want to learn more about it, you can read our report. You can also go to the GIZ Data Lab website. They even have recordings from each of the different sessions available, so you can watch them with your organization or take inspiration from them. The third strategy is to bring together gender data producers and users. Far too often, individuals responsible for producing gender data and individuals responsible for putting gender data to use for policies and programs are working in these disconnected silos, even within the same government, completely unaware of what each other is doing. We heard a lot of frustration in the interviews about this fact. So creating spaces for dialogue between gender data users and producers can help to align efforts, foster improved collaboration and uptake of existing gender data. These types of spaces can be organized at the national level among government stakeholders or internationally among counterparts from different governments and institutions. Fourth, engage non-state actors. Non-state actors like civil society, academia, and the media are really important advocates and end users of gender data. They play really important roles in promoting national gender data by pushing for improved data collection and resources, putting existing gender data to use, and partnering with governments on gender data initiatives and capacity building. Efforts to engage non-state actors, we heard they can take many different forms. There were some really cool examples, including initiatives to promote gender data literacy among these groups, creating gender data networks with these groups, and just making gender data more accessible and open for use by these groups. And what I think is a really impressive example of this is an annual report put out by the government of India called the Women and Men in India Report. It features gender data and statistics from 10 different government agencies, which is honestly a feat of coordination in and of itself. But each chapter covers a different aspect of gender equality, whether it's health, education, etc. But what's really cool and really unique is that the gender data that's used for analysis in each chapter is actually compiled into an Excel table that can be easily downloaded by users. And this includes data that's not just disaggregated by gender, it's often further disaggregated by age, marital status, geography, education level. It's become a comprehensive and go-to resource for users in civil society, the media, etc., to conduct their own research, analysis, and reporting. And it's something we really didn't see in other contexts. Just a really impressive initiative. Fifth and finally, and this strategy is specifically aimed at donors, fund gender data systems. Our research highlighted the prescriptive nature of a lot of donor funding as a key barrier to political will, because donors, whether they're bilateral, multilateral, or philanthropic, tend to put funding for gender data into their own priority areas, whether that's education or gender-based violence. And of course, we understand why this happens. Yet initiatives that aim to strengthen countries' gender data systems and advance national data priorities are often far more impactful and sustainable than those that look to increase gender data production on a specific topic or area. And more importantly, they do a lot more to promote domestic ownership and priorities. Many of you are probably familiar with UN Women's Women Count program, but what they've been able to accomplish in partnership with the government of Uganda has been really successful and exceptional. By providing financial and technical support, the government of Uganda actually adopted its first ever set of national priority gender equality indicators. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics assisted 45 government departments and agencies at both the federal and the local level to develop and implement statistical plans to increase gender data production. It's effectively mainstreaming gender data across the Ugandan government. It's really impressive. And also the Bureau of Statistics launched a Gender Data Statistics Portal, which is a centralized database for gender and statistics across different areas. And I think this just goes to show what can be accomplished and how sustainable the impact can be when donors are funding and strengthening gender data systems rather than just collections of data on a specific topic. It's a really impressive example also featured in our report. So I'll stop there, but if we have whet your appetite, if you want to learn more about this issue and these examples, I encourage you to download Data2X's new Global Synthesis Report. It's available on their website for those of you who are watching online, those of you in the room, the QR code on the pamphlet on your chairs, it's all over the room, you can't miss it. We won't let you get away without downloading it. So please take a look at that. That's it from me. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Kate. We're buying you an extra glass of wine for pushing the report tonight. And just so you know, both the LDRI report and the FemDev report are available from that link. And I want to thank you both for so ably setting the stage for our next conversation. In particular, I think those country examples are so critical to take what we're hearing in theory and really putting it into practice. And our next guests are going to do a little bit more on that as well, but particularly in the context of Kenya. So I am now so pleased and honored to welcome to the stage Honorable Harriette Chiggai and Seema Jalan. Honorable Harriette serves in the Executive Office of the President of Kenya as the advisor on women's rights. So her office advises the president on all matters pertaining to women's rights and empowerment and coordinates the adoption of the women's agenda across all sectors. She's breaking those silos that Kate just identified. In one short year as the gender data champion in the Kenyan government, she has made significant strides coordinating action across government to leverage gender data for gender equality. Yes, absolutely. And joining Honorable Harriette in conversation is Seema Jalan. Seema is a deputy director with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she leads policy, advocacy, and communications efforts in their gender equality division. For over 20 years, she has promoted gender equity, girls' and women's health, and human rights around the world. She's also a longtime supporter of Data2X and serves on our board. So welcome, Seema and Honorable Harriette.
Thank you. This is on now? Great. Thank you so much, Nirja, and for the presentations. I mean, wow, what a great context to dive into this conversation with Honorable Harriette Chiggai, and I've had the privilege of working with Honorable Chiggai on prior occasions, including the UN General Assembly and prior CSW. So this is a fantastic continuation of our conversation. And I just want to start by saying, at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, data drives everything we do. So we love this conversation, and we're really proud to be one of the biggest donors to the production of gender data. But there's not enough of us. So those of you who are in the room and online who are in the donor community, I invite you to step up and make sure that we can deliver on the promise that Michelle put out for delivering for women and girls, because each data point is a person's life that we're trying to reach. So let's dive in, Honorable Chiggai. I would say at the foundation, we've been so excited by the journey that you've helped lead for the government of Kenya on breaking down the silos, on really getting policies designed that are built on real data points. So on that, I want to start by asking, just to set the stage, how has gender data been used to drive policy change in Kenya? And to get tactical, because if the folks who are tuning in, this is like a gender data crowd, what kinds of data are most important and useful for uptake? And I say this as a gender data user myself, not somebody who's a technical expert.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. First, I would wish to thank Data2X for actually put us together and for us to have this setting, because when we talk about gender data, it's as political as it sounds. I normally say life in itself is a risk, but what is the other bigger risks that we need to take? And gender data is one of them. It's a risk in itself. And since it's a new baby in the room, everybody needs to understand what it is. So one of the main things that we need to do is we must have political goodwill. And we don't have, as we speak, enough voices to sit in that space for us to be able to advocate for gender data and policies moving towards data and data reforms. So the Kenyan government has recognized the importance of gender data. And I must say I'm the living evidence, because you made me the champion, the data champion in the Kenyan government. And we have also realized for effective policy making, it's important for planning. So we must have real-time data for proper planning and for us to be able to plug into real-time solutions. So this informs how we respond to women issues cutting across board at national level and the county government level. And you also realize that Kenya really relies on the demographic and health survey, which informs policies within the government. So you realize in 2022, we had the KDHS report, which gave us the sex disaggregated data around matters GBV. And when we looked at how teenage pregnancies are, GBV contributes to teenage pregnancies, we actually realized that the Kenyan government is losing almost 6.1 billion on teenage pregnancies. And what then can we do to ensure that we have real-time solutions on this? So we have the gaps, and you remember during UNGA, we made a promise that we must actually put the unpaid care work policy. We must champion and have that policy out. And that has already been done. And I think the Ministry of Gender is now moving forward to put the policy in place, having the time use survey released sometime, I think in November or December last year, October last year. So you do realize that advocacy is also a process, and data helps to accelerate this. So this also is very important, because when we launched the time use survey, we realized that within the Kenyan government, we have not placed the women in terms of the care work. So the question then is unpaid care work. How does it contribute to the Kenya GDP? And you then realize that we have to shift and have these policies properly institutionalized, and we must have policies that now speak into the real issues that are affecting Kenyan women and girls. When you look at the 2/3 gender principle, which is also a constitutional requirement, you've realized our president is the #1 champion when it comes to women leadership. And these are not political statements. We are actually keen, because for the first time in the history of our government, we have actually realized their third rule, when it comes to representation of leaders within the cabinet level, the permanent secretary level. And just like I said, my office spotlights issues cutting across all ministries and the government. And we realize now we are moving into the private sector as well. We have realized with proper data, we now have to look at the private sector, to have private sector join hands with the public sector so that we can have policies that are sitting well, cutting across board. So when you look at employability margins, you realize that the private sector also is the big employer. So where are the policies? Government has these good policies that are put in place, but we have to castigate those policies so that they can sit across board, so that it's not just government speaking on its own. We have to involve everybody when it comes to solutions and to plug into the gaps that we currently have. So we are now moving into now doing proper analysis of proper representation, not only at the senior level, but we have to go down even at directors, because if we want to get women at the top, we have to create a mentorship platform. We have to synergize, we have to plug in and create a synergized system where you can get women rising, So data then becomes very, very, very important in terms of the solutions that we want to give. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chiggai. You mentioned so many things around just the complexity of policies that good gender data collection can support. So thank you for sharing that. And I love your point about how it might extend to the private sector, because that's a big missing piece that you don't hear about too often. Yeah. So let's switch to the political will side. You're a political leader who obviously has the political will for gender data. How do we sustain political will? I mean, for any of the countries that we represent or live in, how do you sustain it through different political administrations? And what works to ensure political will and that use over time?
Okay. I think the best approach would be to have many voices and many champions, and then coupled with proper communication, because communication is also a missing link. Because when we talk about gender data, and now we are talking about the politics of gender data, in most cases it sounds alien, but it's because most of us don't understand what it is. And that is why I'm so impressed with the research that has been done by Laren. I got it, Alderai, because then we are able to get into the cracks of all these issues. We have evidence, which is what we all need when we want to make a case. I have been in several rooms where everybody's asking, why are you pushing for this? And the question I ask is, where are the women? Because in most cases, I tend to find myself alone. And then when you're seated there alone, they go and the father say, you're too young. And I'm saying, age is just but a number, I could be 75 looking 20, So you find there are all these biases, and you can only get to the right spot if everybody is speaking the same language. So how then do we get everybody to speak the same language? How do we get everybody to plug in? How do we get as many champions within the political space to do this? So it then calls a lot in terms of we have to have deliberate steps. We must be deliberate. We must find our advocates in all the spaces. And that is the only way out. On matters political goodwill, for as long as we have the information, I think everybody will plow in. When we talk about political goodwill, governments also love to see figures, money. Where are we spending our money? Where are we spending our budgets? Where are we saving? If we're able to provide solutions, targeted solutions, you'll realize that you save quite a bit. Because for a long time, our budgets have not been data sensitized. And we are now moving towards discussions about gender sensitive budgets. So we cannot have those budgets if we don't have the right data to speak into the budgets. Yeah.
Well, you read my mind on the next question. I just want to say, being a woman leader, either you're too young or you're too old. You're never the right age to be a woman leader. So I hear that. So let's move to the funding piece, as you mentioned. There's two aspects to this. We at the beginning, we've heard from the previous speakers I think the most recent estimate is that $500 million is needed per year from now to 2030 to adequately fund core gender systems. And on your point, Dr. Kate, that it is about gender data systems and system strengthening. But in addition, of course, countries need to also allocate more funding to gender data. But we also are living in a context of extremely constrained fiscal environments for a variety of reasons. Can you say more about how Kenya has thought about budgeting for gender data and spending so that the data is produced and that it's also analyzed for policy?
All right. Thank you very much. First, you must realize that my office is barely 2 years old. And also, you'll also realize that routine funding and all these cases that we're putting across, our argument currently is that routine funding for gender data should be the current frontier because it should not be placed on the side so that it's a next issue. So we have to accelerate these discussions. We have to create the need, for these discussions to be scaled up. If we continue ourselves to collecting data after 5 years through demographic health survey, we miss out on the ever-changing, landscape and the need to have real-time data. So we need to have spaces where collection of data is not clustered in terms of 5 years, but it has to be real-time data. To an extent that if I go to a dashboard right now, I could be able to tell this is where we are, and these are the solutions that we are looking for. For example, we are facing currently the problem on technology-assisted GBV. That is a huge problem because femicide has now become almost like taking a cup of tea on a daily basis. So we have normalized it. So the question then is, where is data? What are the challenges that are causing these issues? What are the kind of solutions that we are looking at? And where do we want to plug in? So you then realize that government's plans and budgets every year might not anticipate the emerging trends. And this is one area that we actually need to factor in. There's also need to have partners who can collaborate with government in getting gender data to see where the gaps, spotlight, and then create real-time solutions. So data then does not mean it has to wait. Yeah, it has to be done, and this has to be done on a need basis, and this is now, today, and every other time. So as government, we have embraced the citizen-generated data as long as it aligns with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and Standards. You realize that is something that we are moving forward to. You realize that Kenyan government also has moved into putting data within one portal in terms of payments, in terms of collection. We are moving into the e-citizen portal. That already in itself is huge, and it's real-time collection of data, reporting, and just getting to audit the systems that we have. I mentioned earlier about advocacy within government, and so once this is appreciated, it makes a case for budgeting for gender data, and this can increase in matters GDP and development within the country. We also need the gender-sensitive budgets, which can only be realized with real-time data, because every time we ask where are the women in this, when we want to budget for women and girls, we realize there's no disaggregated data. You can have data between the ages of maybe 11 to 15, but 0 to 11, the data is missing. So we have to move forward and ensure that this is done. When we talk about technology-assisted GBV, we have not gone further to analyze what is causing this. We have not further gone to check what are the age groups which are finding themselves within the technology space, and how do we spotlight this issue, and how do we go further to create the solutions around it. So for me, this is very important, and that is where we must invite all institutions that deal with sensitization, institutions that deal with training, because the Kenyan government has gone further into TVETs, so that we can create a larger base when it comes to education. So you find that we need everybody, we need all hands on deck for us to create advocacy, for us to create awareness, and for us to move forward, as a people. So this then becomes very, very, very important. So financing of gender data requires everybody, and that is also a key issue where we have CSOs which are doing a very good job. We have private institutions which are doing a very good job. But the question is, are we in silos or are we working together? That is also another key area that we need to look at. And when we talk about financing, there's no shortcut. We must find the finances and plug in, because without that, then we'll be back here again, reviewing the same issues. So I would wish next year we have a better report. Yeah.
Thank you. And I do think that the work that you've helped lead for the government of Kenya and on behalf of Kenyan people has been really extraordinary and groundbreaking and a model for other countries as well. So thank you. So I want to move to the application side. And one of the last times that Honorable Chiggai and I were together, we were talking about the development of Kenya's childcare policy, which I know has been moving through the government and hopefully will be adopted soon. And that was really driven by gender intentional data and time use data, as you mentioned. Can you speak to the role, so that's at the national level, can you speak to the role of data at the sub-national level? And this came up in some of the findings from the report of really making sure it's targeted to the specific realities of women and girls in different parts of the country, and how you've worked to ensure that policies are crafted for the different realities in Kenya in particular.
Yeah. You realize the time use survey is also an alien issue. Yeah. In the sub-Saharan Africa, I think Kenya is the first country to now come up with this. And having launched the time use survey, then the Kenyan government now is putting in place the care policy, the unpaid care policy. You also realize this is also a gray area. We now need proper data to speak into this issue. You realize that is the same portal where we actually need disaggregated data. We have the widows, we have the senior citizens, who are actually caregivers, but they're not taken care of. We have the day-to-day, the women who actually go to work on a daily basis, but still are caregivers, So where is this data? It is still not clear. And maybe Ideal Arai, you have a new job there, So you come to realize that for us to be able to give those solutions, because now it's baby steps, we are now plugging in. So now we need to move forward and get the right data for us to create solutions to these issues. So it is still work in progress. We are yet to get the real-time data on care work. And I think that is something that we need to move very fast, so that in the next financial year, we're able to budget for the same. So this is actually something that is going on, and I really commend the teams that have worked around the clock in ensuring that we have this policy in place. And also our ministries, also the Ministry of Gender is really working around the clock to ensure that this policy is out. So we are hoping in the next 3 or so months, we should be able to have this policy out, and we can be able to put now proper budgeting and budget lines. I'm hoping by the next financial year, we'll have this policy out, and we need more voices actually in the same space. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And as you said, Honorable Chiggai, just to add an underline to it, it could be the first policy in the African continent that's informed by time use data. And so it'll be really exciting to see how this develops over time. And I wish the government luck in next steps. So we have time for just one last question. And it's moving it to a little bit of a personal question for you as a leader, a champion, an ambassador for Data2X. What has gender data made possible for you and your work in terms of your reflections on how it's impacted your career journey and the impact it's had on your fellow country citizens?
All right, first allow me to say this. At national level, once the policies are made, we have to cascade them to the county governments. We have about 47 of them. As we speak right now, we have we have the national bill on policy on statistics. Yeah. Noting the county statistics bill have to be informed by the national policy. So you find for us to be able to have 47 county statistic bills, the national government has to play a big role. And that is a lot of work in terms of moving the 47 county governments to ensure that they have proper policies in place. So this is something that my office is going to champion, and we are going to push forward so that we can work on the same and ensure that the county governments also are well aligned with the national policies. Only then can we now implore upon the private sector to follow suit. In terms of my personal level, in terms of how gender data has actually assisted us, you realize for you to advise, you must have facts, you know? And just like I said earlier, when you speak figures, you are more convincing. So that is a big plus for me and my office. And I would wish also to thank my team here led by Florence Mashio, and I have Masiga in the house. We have worked tireless to actually ensure that we have a whole department on data. So we are moving this with a lot of passion. You all agree with me, without passion, you're as good as dead. So we don't want to die. So the office has we have a whole department on data within my office. And this is something that we're encouraging every other institution to have, because when you speak figures, you're more convincing. When you speak figures, you know, you cannot challenge matters figures. So this is one area that I really love, because it's a new area, you know, and as challenging as it comes, we have to have a vantage point where we are able to meet everybody else, because you cannot argue. If I come to your office and say, hey, you have 60 employees in this office, your management has 20, where is my space for the women? You know, you cannot argue if you have 2 board members who are women out of a board of 11. So we have managed to argue our case very well by use of data. And I find it very convincing and more productive, because only then you are very, very, very convincing within any space that you're in. So yeah, so I'm enjoying my work.
I think it's very clear your passion for this work, and we thank you all. There's so many women and girls and other people will be impacted by the work that you've been leading and your office. So thank you so much for your steadfast leadership. Thank you so much to Data2X for hosting this important conversation. And I'll just leave it with the next time we convene, we'll be talking about making sure the money actually follows the data. So thank you so much. Back to Neeraja to close us out.
Thank you both so much for that thoughtful conversation and for planning our next event. I think what I was so struck by hearing both of you is the urgency of this. Gender data cannot wait. We need it today to accelerate policy that are critical to the issues that women and girls are facing. So everything that you've heard this week and next week at CSW, just remember the data is what's needed behind that. So I hope we all come away also with the sense that gender data necessitates political engagement. Funding and acting upon data require political prioritization and leadership at all levels and across all stakeholders. We're going to hold the funders to it next time. And our great thanks to all of our speakers and presenters. I encourage everyone to download both reports that were highlighted today. They offer insights for anyone interested in building political will for gender data. And as Michelle said, that's anyone interested in gender equality. So you can do that using the QR codes. There's one too. And our deep thanks to the Office of the Women's Rights Advisor for co-hosting this event and for the continued championship of gender data. So thank you everyone for joining us today, online, in person. For those of you in the room, I encourage you to stay, connect with each other, keep the conversation going, and thank you.